Hi again. Well, we left on a bit of a cliffhanger yesterday with chapter 14 finishing on some sort of amazing idea that our narrator has had, but he hasn't told us yet. So I'm hoping that chapter 15 will reveal the mystery of this greatest idea that he has had. And chapter 15 is called The Greatest Idea in the World. That Thursday night, while Mum was at work, instead of doing my homework, I took my Tintin pencil case and my exercise book and went and sat down by the window in the kitchen. I wanted to come up with a plan just like Tom and Josie and Michael had done, and thought that if I sat there, maybe my brain would come up with something exciting all on its own. I have a desk in my room, but I like sitting in the kitchen more because then I can see the sky and the whole city too. Tom says it doesn't matter how big or small a flat is. If it's on the top floor, it becomes a penthouse. That's a kind of house that movie stars live in. I guess they must like sitting in kitchens and looking at skies and cities too. I waited a long time for my brain to think of something, but when Mum came home, she found me still sitting at the kitchen table, pressing the Snowy and Captain Haddock buttons on my pencil case. I couldn't think of anything, not even after she came and sat with me to watch the sunset. I love watching the sunset with Mum. She calls it the magic hour because you can see colours you won't ever see again and birds that might fly away forever, swimming across the skies together. But I can only ever do it properly with Mum. I've tried to watch the sunset on my own and feel just as happy, but I can't seem to do it at all. It doesn't work. By dinner time, I still hadn't thought of anything, so I went straight to bed to see if my brain could think of things better when it was lying down. But I fell asleep instead and had a nightmare that was so scary it made me wake up. I had dreamt of being on a piece of wood in the middle of a dark sea. At first it had been quiet, but then to my right a girl had begun to cry. She was about to be swallowed by a giant whale, and suddenly on my left my dad was shouting for help from a sinking boat, and no matter how hard I tried or how much I wanted to, I couldn't help the girl or stop my dad from disappearing into the water. If you've ever woken up after a nightmare when it's pitch black and so late that nothing in the world is awake, you'll know it isn't nice at all. When I woke up, I couldn't hear anything or see anything, so for a moment I wasn't sure if I was awake or still in my nightmare. But then I heard one of the mice squeaking in the kitchen, and I knew I was awake. That's a good thing about animals. They always let you know they're around, especially when they're hungry. And if they're around, then you know you're real, and the world outside you is real too. I was feeling hot and damp, so I got up and pulled back the covers to make sure I hadn't wet the bed. Luckily I hadn't. I hate wetting the bed. I used to do it all the time after Dad died, but then when I turned 7, something happened and I stopped doing it. Maybe when you turn 7, your body knows you've become too old to wet the bed anymore. I didn't want to lie back down in case I had the nightmare again, so I tiptoed into the kitchen to get a glass of water and see the mice. Mum says that years ago, an old woman who bred all sorts of exotic animals used to live in our flat. That could be why we found a small nest of bright yellow snakes in our kitchen wall last summer, or why we have 2 mice living with us. But I don't mind. I like mice because they make good friends. For just a tiny piece of food, they can become your friends for life. They disappear if they don't like you, so you always know if they're going to be your friends right from the start. And it's always good to know from the start because it saves you from wasting your best cheese. After I got a drink of water, I went back to my room, but I was still too scared to go back to sleep. So I sat on the floor and got one of my favourite Tintin comics out from underneath my bed. It was the one about a rich old opera singer who comes to stay with Captain Haddock, even though he really doesn't want her to, and whose green diamond gets stolen. I couldn't really concentrate on the story because all I could think about was Ahmed and his sister Syra being in the sea. But then, just as I was thinking how the rich old opera singer looked like the Queen, except with a much bigger nose, it suddenly happened. I had it. An idea. And it was without a doubt, quite possibly, the greatest idea in the world. It leapt right into my head, just like a giant frog, and jumped around until I knew it had to work. It just had to. You can always tell when you've had a greatest idea in the world, because it pops up from nowhere. Ordinary ideas take an awfully long time to become an idea because they're ordinary, so your brain can't get excited about them and has to make them slowly, like thousands of boring bread rolls being baked in an extra slow oven. But when an idea is truly great, it doesn't take any time at all. It just suddenly appears and makes your eyes go wide and your brain feel as if it's just been pushed out of bed. Jumping to my feet, I got out my exercise book and drew out my plan. This is what the greatest idea in the world looked like. When I had finished, I stared at it and went over it again and again in my head. I knew right away that it would work, but only if Tom and Josie and Michael helped and kept it all a secret. I got back into bed and lay there, wishing for the morning to come, because as soon as it did, I was going to put the greatest idea in the world into action and help Ahmed find his family. I knew it was going to be the most exciting thing any of us had ever done, and that there was a chance it might get us into trouble too. What I didn't know was just how dangerous an adventure it was going to be, and quite how much trouble it was going to get us in. Chapter 16, The Royal Letter. It's brilliant! Genius! If that doesn't work, then nothing will. Michael, Tom and Josie all looked pretty impressed when I explained the greatest idea in the world to them on the bus to school the next day. Tom looked down at my diagram and eagerly pointed to the letter and pencil. "This bit's easy," he said. "But do you think she'll really get it?" I nodded. "She has to. It's the Royal Mail, so she has to get all her letters. It's the law." "But she's the Queen." "What if she's not home because she's somewhere else doing her duties and things and doesn't get it in time?" asked Michael. "It's already Friday, remember?" Michael was right. The greatest idea in the world could only work if the Queen was at home. She was always on the news, going to lots of places to collect flowers from people, and I hadn't thought about what we would do if she didn't get the letter at all. "It's okay," said Josie reassuringly. "If we post the letter today, then it'll get to her house by tomorrow morning. Tomorrow's only Saturday, and the gates don't close until next Friday. That gives us 6 whole days. So if she's not home, her butler will just open the letter instead, and he'll let her know that she needs to come home right away to talk to the special police and the Prime Minister." "Yes," said Michael. "Exactly." "Yeah, it's going to be brilliant," said Tom, as we jumped off the bus and walked to the school gates. "There's no way she won't help us, not after she reads about Ahmed." "But he mustn't find out," said Michael, tripping over his shoelaces, but too excited to stop and tie them up. "Yeah," I nodded. "He can't know, not until we're really sure that the Queen has found his parents." "Don't worry, we can keep it a secret, and maybe if it does work, then we'll all get to meet the Queen," grinned Tom. "I'll have to get more gel if we do," he added, stiffening his hair with his fingers so that it was spikier than ever. "Maybe we'll all get a medal for helping to keep the gates open," said Josie, kicking her football along. "And Ahmed too, for being so brave." Michael smiled. His smile always goes to one side when he's thinking about something that makes him really, really happy. It must be because he's so happy that his mouth doesn't know which way to go. "Yeah," he nodded. "One of those star-shaped medals, and if we did get one, we could pin it onto our jumpers every day. Or, if it's on a ribbon, we could wear it around our necks," he said, touching the collar of his school jumper. I tried to imagine what it would be like to meet the Queen and be given a star-shaped medal, but the thought made my mind go blank and I couldn't imagine anything at all. Sometimes a thought is so big that it can't squeeze all of itself into my head, no matter how hard I try, and the more I try, the more it makes my head ache. Uncle Lenny says that's where headaches all come from, when you've tried to think too many thoughts, or a giant thought tries to get in but it's too big to fit. He gets headaches all the time because he says when there's no one in the taxi with him, he doesn't have anything else to do but drive around all night and think deep thoughts that light up his mind. Maybe that's why the front of his head is always so shiny. I didn't want to get a headache, so I left the thought of the star-shaped medal alone. All that day, whenever we knew Ahmed couldn't hear us, we talked about the greatest idea in the world, and all the ways the Queen might help him and his family too. Ahmed caught us whispering together in the playground, though, and looked at us in a confused way. "What are you saying?" he asked, looking at all of us. "Nothing," said Michael nervously. "We were just talking about homework," said Josie. "Big homework," I added, quickly crossing my fingers behind my back. "Your homework is small and easy, see? And ours is big and lots more." "Okay," Ahmed said slowly, but I didn't think he sounded like he believed us. After that, we all whispered an agreement not to speak about the plan until home time, which was when we planned to write the royal letter. But it seemed that the more excited we got about putting the greatest idea in the world into action, the longer it took for the day to pass, and that afternoon felt like the longest afternoon any of us had ever had. I kept looking up at the classroom clock to see if its hands had moved, and I could see Tom and Michael and Josie doing the same thing. Then finally, just as we were about to give up hope of them ever reaching 3:15, the bell rang for home time and Mrs. Khan said, "Right everyone, off you go, see you all on Monday." We all hurriedly waved bye to Ahmed and, instead of going with him to meet his foster mum, like we usually did, we ran to the bus stop just as fast as we could. There's a wall behind the bus stop, just long enough to fit 5 people. After we all sat down, Josie gave me a piece of yellow paper she had taken from her class tray and which was brand new, and Tom gave me his very best handwriting pen to use, and Michael gave me his workbook to lean on. He guessed we would have to miss 2 buses home, but it didn't matter, not when we were trying to write the most royal letter any of us had ever written before. Everyone said I should write it because I was the best at spelling. I was pretty nervous, but Tom and Josie and Michael all helped me to choose what to say. So, in the end, it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. This is what the royal letter looked like. Your Royal Majesty of the United Queendom of England. Please, Mrs. Majesty, there is a new boy in our class called Ahmed, and he's a refugee boy from Syria, where there is a war and lots of bullies throwing bombs and hurting people. Ahmed had to get on a boat and walked a long way to come to our school, and had to leave his mum and dad behind in tents too. Ahmed needs to find them before the government closes all the gates. We thought because you own the country and the police and the Prime Minister has to listen to you, that you could please ask your special police and the Prime Minister to keep all the gates open and help Ahmed find his family. We know the gates will close on Friday, so this is an emergency. You can find us at Nelson Primary School, and Mrs. Khan is our teacher and Mrs. Hemsey is Ahmed's special teacher. Please let us know if you can help as soon as you get this letter. Love from me, 9 3/4, Tom, 9, Michael, 9 1/2, and Josie, 9 1/4. When we had finished, Michael held it up to the light and gave it a nod. I don't really know why people like holding things up to the light, but I guess it's because they want to see through them and make sure they're okay. I was glad because even though my writing had gone wonky, everyone said it looked good. It was the longest letter I had ever written in one go, and my hand felt sore, so I jumped off the wall and jiggled it about. In the distance, I could see the bus coming. Have you got a new envelope to put it in? And stamps? Asked Tom anxiously as we got onto the bus. Yep, Mum's got loads, I said, and I'll post it by 5 o'clock from the post box in front of my flat. Don't forget to write special letter on the envelope in purple colouring pen, said Josie. Purple's her favourite colour. And make sure the stamp says first on it, said Michael. When I got home that afternoon, while Mrs. Abbey was making me fish fingers for my tea, I quietly pulled open the big top drawer in the large chest standing in our living room. This drawer is called our used less things drawer because it's always full of things we have lots of but hardly ever use, like paper clips and spare staples and elastic bands and sellotape and bright yellow post-it notes and bits of blank paper. I found an envelope and then carefully took out Mum's small wooden stamp box. Inside it are all the nearly new stamps that Mum's collected from letters she's been sent in the post. Most stamps are marked with something called a postmark, which means you can't use them again, but sometimes they aren't. When that happens, Mum claps her hands like it's Christmas morning, carefully peels the stamp away so it looks just as brand new as possible, and puts it in her stamp box. I picked out 3 that had the nicest pictures with the colour purple in them, and a first in the corner. I knew that most letters just had 1 stamp on them, but I thought 3 might make the letter get to the Queen faster, especially since there was a chance I might miss the 5 o'clock post. Trying to keep things a secret when there's a grown-up around always makes things twice as long. I told Mrs. Abbey I was doing my homework early and coloured in lots of purple swirls on the front of the envelope, and then, just before I put the letter inside it, I thought the Queen should know about Ahmed's sister in the sea. So I wrote, P.S. Ahmed had a little sister called Syra, but she died in the sea, so he needs to find his mum and dad even more specially. Please keep this a secret. I knew what had happened to Ahmed's sister was a secret, but last year Mr. Thompson told us that the Queen has to keep state secrets. And if she can keep secrets about the state of everything, I knew she could keep Ahmed's secret safe for him too. I wonder, do you have a drawer in your house which is full of things? It could be cables, it could be sellotape, it could be bits of stationery. Have a look through it. Maybe it needs organising, or maybe you just need to have a look through and see what's actually in there. Do you actually need those things? Or maybe they could be thrown away. Or maybe you could think of an amazing letter that you could write to somebody really, really important. It doesn't have to be the Queen, but maybe it's somebody important in your family that maybe you haven't written to in a long while. Maybe you could write a letter, and then if your hand starts shaking, just do what our boy in the story does and just shake it out a little bit. It might help. I know you're always brilliant at writing lots and lots, so I know that you can do this task, writing a letter to somebody really important. I'll see you again tomorrow for the next 2 chapters. Bye!